What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we're taking a look at our first NFL mock draft of the season. With the Super Bowl completed, we now know the order of the entire draft, so no better time to do this exercise than now. A couple quick notes before we get into it, though. This mock draft will not feature any trades just because it's still so early on in the offseason, and we anticipate a lot of changes, with some big names potentially being moved, with free agency, etc. So anytime those type of changes occur, have no fear, we're going to have an updated type NFL mock draft. But in the meantime, if you guys enjoy, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, give us a follow on Twitter at alldaypigskin and interact with us there, seeing our thoughts on everything NFL and fantasy football related. And finally, check us out online at alldaypigskin.com. Sign up for a free newsletter. All the details in the description. But with that being said, let's get right into it. Kicking off the draft, we begin with the Jacksonville Jaguars, who with the first pick overall select quarterback Trevor Lawrence. And honestly, this one is all but a done deal because there's a new regime in town for the Jaguars. Quarterback is a position of need, and usually almost 10 out of 10 times that translates into the front office selecting their own hand-picked guy at that position. Now, it does help that Trevor Lawrence is considered a generational talent, and honestly, it might be a little bit boring, but if you want a slam dunk pick, no matter how many drafts you see, there's not going to be a trade here at the 101. The Jaguars will not consider another position. It is Trevor Lawrence or bust for Jacksonville. Next up, with the second pick overall, the New York Jets select quarterback Zach Wilson. And the big question that has to be answered here for the New York Jets is, are you going to move on from Sam Darnold? If the answer is yes, then going quarterback here is all but a given. I currently have Wilson higher than Justin Fields in my rankings because I do think he fits that mold of a prototypical passer more so than Fields. But if the Jets decide to stick with Sam Darnold, which I would say is less likely based on what we have read, what's come out from the Jets organization, then this pick could very well be an offensive lineman, someone like a Rashawn Slater, someone like a Penei Sewell, going best player available and also addressing a need to build around your quarterback that you already have. But again, as things stand right now, Zach Wilson seems like the more likely selection. With the third pick overall, the Miami Dolphins select wide receiver DeVonta Smith. Now, for what it's worth, I actually have Ja'Marr Chase as my number one wide receiver in this draft class. But the reason I think the Dolphins go with DeVonta Smith is currently Tua is their guy moving forward long term, unless something changes there, a la a trade for a Deshaun Watson or something like that. Then you have to build around Tua. Now, I think that this is where the NFL draft really begins because the Dolphins, it's not as certain for them that they're going to go one specific position as the two picks prior. You could see an offensive lineman here as well. Again, Penei Sewell, Rashawn Slater, or a wide receiver to really help that wide receiver core give a weapon to Tua, and specifically one here that he is familiar with. Add guys that he has chemistry with. DeVonta Smith definitely fits that bill. That's why he is the selection over Ja'Marr Chase. With the fourth pick overall, the Atlanta Falcons select quarterback Justin Fields. And without a doubt, this is the toughest pick to predict in the early parts of the draft because the Falcons could go a number of different ways. Obviously, the defense is a huge area of need, but honestly, there isn't a big-time defensive player that warrants a top 5 selection, in my opinion, in this year's class. You could also go maybe wide receiver, as Julio Jones isn't getting any younger, or an offensive lineman to protect Matt Ryan. But all signs point to the Atlanta Falcons, long-term, not continuing on with Matty Ice. So that tells me, coupled with the fact that when are the Falcons, considering all the talent they have, especially offensively, going to be picking in the top 5 again? For them to target the quarterback position, use Matt Ryan as a bridge quarterback, someone that a young rookie can learn from. Maybe they see Justin Fields as a Michael Vick-esque type of guy. So for that reason, quarterback here seems like the most likely scenario. With the fifth pick overall, the Cincinnati Bengals select offensive lineman Rashawn Slater. And in my opinion, this pick has to be an offensive lineman almost no matter what, because the Bengals firsthand saw what happens last year when you've got a franchise quarterback, good for you in Joe Burrow, but you put him behind an inept offensive line. He's going to take a lot of hits and he's potentially going to get injured. And that worst case scenario happened with Joe Burrow. And unless the Bengals want to, waste the best years of Joe Burrow with him running for his life, taking hits, and decreasing his playing career, they're going to invest in protecting that asset. I've had Rashawn Slater as my top offensive lineman for a long time, even before mock draft season began, because I see him as a more flexible option. You could put him in a number of different positions on that offensive line, and I do think he is more NFL ready day one than someone like a Penei Sewell, who will also definitely be up for consideration with this pick. At number 6, the Philadelphia Eagles select wide receiver Ja'Marr Chase. Now, you're going to hear a lot of chatter surrounding the quarterback position here because it sure looks like the Eagles are going to be moving on from Carson Wentz via a trade. And if that happens, does that mean it will be Jalen Hurts moving forward? A lot of people think that Hurts isn't necessarily the long-term answer. Now, my opinion on the matter is that, yes, he wasn't all that great in the regular season, and that probably long-term, he's not going to be the guy in Philadelphia. But in the same breath, it was only a year ago where the Eagles still drafted him relatively high, so I do think they're going to continue to kick the tires on Hurts and still address a very important position because they need desperate help when it comes to wide receivers, whether it's injuries, whether it's age. That positional group right now needs help, and landing Ja'Marr Chase, who in a lot of people's eyes is the top overall wide receiver in this draft class, would be a huge help to whoever is the quarterback in Philadelphia. Cornerback could potentially also be a area that they address, but I think right now the better value is going wide receiver in Chase. At number 7, the Detroit Lions select wide receiver Jaylen Waddle. Now, obviously, the Lions were involved in a huge blockbuster trade that sent Matthew Stafford to the Rams in exchange for some draft capital. And maybe if they hadn't gotten a quarterback in return, then this pick would have definitely been someone like a Trey Lance. But no, they got Jared Goff in that package as well. In short term, Jared Goff is a serviceable quarterback. So, in my opinion, I don't think the Lions are all that likely to go quarterback here. Instead, address another huge area of need offensively, the wide receiver position. Kenny Golladay, Marvin Jones, free agents. And if those guys don't return, the Lions are going to have nobody at that position. You could also go defense here. That's an area that needs to be upgraded. So someone like a Micah Parsons or cornerback Farley, Surtain. But in my opinion, Waddle is slightly better value and also still addresses a huge area of need for the Lions. With the 8th pick overall, the Carolina Panthers select quarterback Trey Lance. And it sure seems like the Panthers are desperately trying to upgrade the quarterback position. If you look at it, they were number 2 right behind the Rams in the Matthew Stafford sweepstakes. Their name continues to get brought up in Deshaun Watson as far as potential trade candidates. And we know that Teddy Bridgewater isn't the answer long term. So as things stand right now, quarterback seems like the most likely scenario. I think Trey Lance is a great fit for the Panthers potentially. He's going to sit a year behind Teddy Bridgewater, who might not be a long-term franchise quarterback answer, but as a bridge quarterback, someone to learn from, he fits that role very nicely. And Trey Lance is someone that offers huge upside, not only athletically, but also as a thrower of the football. So this is a pick that would make sense. Now, if the Panthers do somehow land a quarterback via trade or free agency, a position that I would look for here instead would be offensive line, someone like a Penei Sewell. But as things stand right now, that position has not been addressed, so Trey Lance is the guy. Next to number 9, the Denver Broncos select cornerback Caleb Farley. And for the Broncos, they narrowly miss out on the top 4 quarterbacks. So with that being the case, I don't see them reaching for a signal caller here. And for that reason, they go back to the defensive side of the football, which does need help. Now, you could see a name like a Micah Parsons here, but there are some question marks as far as some off-the-field issues for him. So that might knock him down a couple of spots in the draft. We'll have to wait and see there. We also have to see what happens with Von Miller. You might see an edge rusher here, but right now I don't think there's a clear-cut elite edge rusher in this draft class. So for that reason, I'm looking at the next best position, and that is cornerback. I think this is good value for Farley, who I have slightly above Patrick Surtain. Seems like a good fit. I like the upside there. Farley to the Broncos. With the 10th pick overall, the Dallas Cowboys select offensive lineman Penei Sewell. And if one of the top two offensive linemen, Sewell or Slater, is somehow available with this 10th pick, I think the Cowboys are going to be absolutely ecstatic, because the former strength of this team, the offensive line, has kind of taken a step back, injuries, retirements, etc. So going someone like Sewell, great value pick here, by the way, is not only going to help protect your quarterback, open up holes for your running back, but also make your entire offense and team better. You could argue that the Cowboys also desperately need cornerback help, but at this point, you look at the value. In my opinion, Penei Sewell is worth a whole lot more than, let's say, Patrick Surtain. It is also an area of need. So for me, this is a great value pick and just a great fit in general. At number 11, the New York Giants select tight end Kyle Pitts. And even though the designation says tight end here for Pitts, don't be fooled. This guy is just an absolute stud. I think that he should just be looked at as a pass catcher, and might be the next best available pass catcher after Waddle, DeVonta Smith, and Jamar Chase, which if one of those guys was available, I think this is where the New York Giants would go. But either way, this is a great consolation prize for the Giants. Maybe the development of Evan Ingram hasn't gone exactly as they would like either, so a little bit of a additional boost in that area, but you need to get offensive talent to continue the growth of Daniel Jones, so this pick does that and then some. Moving on, the San Francisco 49ers with the 12th pick overall select cornerback Patrick Surtain. And even though the 49ers might be hoping that they could upgrade the quarterback position in the draft, I just don't see one of the top 4 quarterbacks dropping to them at number 12. If they want to do so, they're going to need to trade up. And since this mock draft version is excluding trades, we're looking at the secondary, which is, to be fair, a huge need for the 49ers defensively. It's an area that's kind of been trending downwards, and now with the impending departure of Richard Sherman, it's going to get even more depleted. Patrick Surtain, depending on how you feel about Caleb Farley, is either the number 1 or the number 2 cornerback in this draft class. So from that perspective, I do think the 49ers are getting good value and also addressing a big need here. Next, at number 13, the LA Chargers select offensive lineman Christian Darrisaw. And it sure seems like the LA Chargers hit on their next future franchise quarterback with Justin Herbert, if his rookie season was any indication. So what's the next logical step? Well, it's upgrading that offensive line and finding a cornerstone piece there. And Darrisaw can be exactly that. Even though he's not quite on the level of a Sewell or a Rashawn Slater, he's widely regarded as that next best offensive line. The Chargers don't want to be in a situation like the Cincinnati Bengals, where they've got a young, promising quarterback, but he's playing behind a porous offensive line. You want to prevent Herbert from taking unnecessary hits and keep him healthy. Darrisaw does just that. With the 14th pick overall, the Minnesota Vikings select defensive end Kwity Paye. And for the Vikings, I think ultimately this pick will come down to what they accomplish in free agency, because the Vikings took a huge step back defensively as a whole last season. In the secondary, it was atrocious. The defensive line wasn't that much better. And you could also argue that they need some offensive line help as well. So a lot of different options to go with here, but I'm specifically going best player available. Kwity Paye, regarded potentially as the top defensive end in this draft class. And the Vikings address an area of need here. But again, watch out for what Minnesota does in free agency, because ultimately I think that will be the most telling in terms of what they turn around and then do in the draft. At number 15, the New England Patriots select linebacker Micah Parsons. And to me, this seems like a classic Bill Belichick selection. And what I mean by that is, on talent alone, Parsons is arguably a top 10 pick. But because there are some off-field issues, his stock could potentially plummet. And obviously, that's the biggest thing to keep an eye out for with Parsons. If those issues don't have all that much validity, then he could definitely be a top 10 selection. But if there is some truth to them and even more info comes out, then don't be shocked for him to drop further and further. But as things stand right now, is there a better fit for an extremely talented player that maybe has a couple of question marks or concerns surrounding him, then New England and Bill Belichick buy into the Patriot way, go under Bill Belichick's tutelage. This is an area of need, great value. I would love this fit for the New England Patriots. At number 16, the Arizona Cardinals select cornerback Jaycee Horn. And for Arizona, if this pick isn't an offensive lineman, it almost surely has to be on the defensive side of the football, because in so many games, the Arizona defense just put the team in holes time after time, forcing Kyler Murray to put up points in bunches. So how do you fix that issue? Well, you fortify the defense. And it's true that Arizona could address pretty much all three levels, and they have to, the defensive line, linebackers, and the secondary. But with the expected departure of Patrick Peterson, all of a sudden that secondary gets even worse, becomes a bigger area of need. And so for that reason, Horn is the fit here. At number 17, the Las Vegas Raiders select linebacker Jeremiah Owusu-Koromoah. And for the Raiders, this pick definitely has to be on the defensive side of the football, because that defense was absolutely atrocious. And honestly, I love this fit here because it seems like the Raiders have been trying to find that next great linebacker that can captain their defense for forever. And Koromoah can definitely do that. I don't think the gap between him and Parsons is all that much. So I love this fit. Upgrade a huge position of need with a great value pick as well. At number 18, and with their second first-round selection, the Miami Dolphins select offensive lineman Alex Leatherwood. And even though this pick might seem like a little bit of a reach considering some of the other offensive linemen that are available, I still really like Leatherwood. I think he's a relatively safe selection, but best of all, it continues that trend of building familiarity for Tua and having him be as comfortable as possible in this offense. Because with your first selection, you added DeVonta Smith, someone that Tua knows well. Then with your second selection, Alex Leatherwood, same situation. Pretty much, if you can, build that Alabama talent pool in Miami. I think that will be a good thing for Tua, so he can get a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more relaxed, and the Miami Dolphins just continue to make that offense even better. At number 19, the Washington football team selects offensive lineman Samuel Cosmi. And in my eyes, this pick almost has to be on the offensive side of the football. The defense is already very well in place. You could argue maybe this pick could go in the secondary, if anything, on the defensive side of the football, but I think that would be a reach at this point in time. So instead, focus on the offensive line and fortifying that group for whoever your franchise quarterback might be. Now, again, a point could be made here that Washington should be going the direction of quarterback, and I wouldn't disagree with you, but they did just give Taylor Heinicke an extension, and he does have history with Ron Rivera from their time in Carolina, so keep that in mind. I think this pick goes one of two ways, either quarterback or offensive lineman, and right now I'm leaning more so offensive line, and Cosmi is my next best available offensive lineman. At number 20, the Chicago Bears select quarterback Mac Jones. And this pick has to be on the offensive side of the football for the Bears. And if they don't get a quarterback in free agency or via trade, cough, cough, Carson Wentz, then this pick almost certainly will be a quarterback in the draft itself. But let's pretend that, sure, they get some quarterback in free agency, then you would be looking at offensive lineman or wide receiver here. We don't expect Allen Robinson to be in Chicago this upcoming season, so someone like Rashad Bateman makes a lot of sense. The offensive line is kind of a mess, so, next best available offensive lineman is a great pick as well. But since the Bears right now, as far as the recording time of this video, are only with Mitch Trubisky and Nick Foles, who neither one is really a viable starting quarterback, you have to address that position. The most important position, Mac Jones is someone that produced in Alabama, and if it wasn't for DeVonta Smith, probably would have won the Heisman. So for that reason, he is the selection as the hopefully next future franchise quarterback in Chicago. Next, number 21, the Indianapolis Colts select offensive lineman Elijah Vera-Tucker. And if Indianapolis wants to stay in contention for one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, they have to replace the retired Anthony Costanza, who leaves a huge void on that offensive line. We saw how much the Colts rely on that great unit. They built that team from the inside out, and regardless who your quarterback is in 2021, you need to address that position and the hole that Costanza left. I think Vera-Tucker is so versatile that pretty much anywhere you put him on that offensive line and he could have success. At this point in time, he is a great value pick and almost a must pick situation for the Colts. Next to number 22, the Tennessee Titans select defensive lineman Christian Barmore. And for the Titans, this pick almost has to be on the defensive side of the football, and even more so on the defensive line. So many of their defensive issues started up front in the trenches, and adding a big body like Barmore could go a long way in fixing some of those issues. You need someone that can fill up those gaps, stop opposing running backs, and then allow the guys that you have on the edge to get after the quarterback. Barmore does exactly that. Next to number 23, the New York Jets select wide receiver Rashad Bateman. And after going with future, hopefully, franchise quarterback Zach Wilson with their first selection, the Jets decide to add some weapons for Wilson here. Bateman does exactly that. In all honesty, if Bateman is still available at this point in time in the draft, I think he is an absolute steal. To me, the separation between him, Chase, Smith, and Waddle isn't all that much. And yes, the Jets selected Denzel Mims last year in the early part of the draft, but you still need more weapons in New York. Brashad Perriman, he's not the answer long term. Jamison Crowder is a very solid piece, but again, not really a wide receiver one, which Bateman can absolutely be. Next to number 24, the Pittsburgh Steelers select offensive lineman Jaylen Mayfield, and upgrading the offensive line for the Steelers has to be priority number one, because the fact is that they are facing a potential huge departure of a number of cornerstone guys. Names like Pouncey, Villanueva, and DeCastro have been big time in years prior, but there could be casualty hits. There could be retirements, so you need young blood in that offensive line group. And if Big Ben has one last year in him, you need to protect him. So offensive line is the top area of need 100%. Jaylen Mayfield is that next best offensive lineman on our big board. At number 25, the Jacksonville Jaguars select cornerback Asante Samuel Jr. And after addressing the biggest need, quarterback with the first overall pick in Trevor Lawrence, the Jaguars turn their attention to another huge area of need in the secondary specifically. Whether it's cornerback or safety, it wouldn't shock me here with this pick. I would also say an offensive lineman is a possibility, like a lot of other teams naturally do. When you get a franchise quarterback, you look at adding offensive line help and shoring up any deficiencies. So to me, it'll come down to those possibilities, either secondary help or offensive line help. But right now, I just think that secondary is such a mess that you have to look at adding some pieces, and Asante Samuel Jr. is a nice start in the right direction. Next to number 26, the Cleveland Browns select defensive end Gregory Rousseau. And I think this is a great fit for the Browns, not only because of value, but also because of need. With Olivier Vernon potentially leaving the Browns this offseason, you need to add another guy opposite Myles Garrett. And Rousseau is someone that, yes, his draft stock has kind of been all over the place in the first round, maybe a little bit raw, but I think this is a good place for the Browns to stop his slide. And he can have a great mentor to learn from in Myles Garrett, and then also alleviate some pressure that Myles Garrett is facing every single play. Addressing that defensive line is a good place to start in the first round for the Browns. Next to number 27, the Baltimore Ravens select wide receiver Rondale Moore. And while it's true the Ravens could go a number of different directions with this pick, I think they have to look at adding a viable wide receiver to this offense. They can't just rely on their tight end and on the legs of Lamar Jackson. And sure, I get it. You've got someone like a Marquise Brown, who the Baltimore Ravens spent high draft capital on not so long ago, but I still maintain that he's not really all that viable or a reliable type of wide receiver. He struggles mightily with drops and consistency. And other than having big time speed, right now, he still hasn't added all that much to his arsenal. I really like Rondale Moore. He is my 5th overall wide receiver in this class after the top 4 guys. And at this point in time, to me, is a good fit. Yes, what the Ravens do in free agency will have a lot to say about the way of this pick, but right now, we are looking at Rondale Moore. With the 28th pick overall, the New Orleans Saints select linebacker Zaven Collins. And the Saints are going to be an extremely interesting team in terms of what they do during this offseason, because it almost feels like that they're going to be doing more cutting than actual signing of players just because of their current cap situation. But we expect the Saints to lose potentially a lot of players on that defensive line, so adding someone there is definitely a possibility. But Collins at this point in time is a good value pick. The Saints have needed, a big-time linebacker that can kind of captain their defense for a while now, and Collins definitely has that upside. So here, he is a guy that just makes a whole lot of sense. Next to number 29, the Green Bay Packers select linebacker Nick Bolton. And for the Packers, I think the most likely selections here are offensive lineman, linebacker, secondary help, and potentially wide receiver, but obviously don't get your hopes up, Green Bay Packer fans, because that just hasn't been the MO of the guys in charge in Green Bay in terms of selecting wide receivers in the first round, despite the fact that they've got Aaron Rodgers and need to add someone opposite DeVonta Adams. So if we take that out of the equation, and to be fair, I do think there's a big drop-off after Rondale Moore, so no need to reach at the wide receiver position. I'm looking at Nick Bolton. He's my next best available player, fits an area of need, and it's a match that makes a lot of sense. The Packers wanted to potentially take a linebacker early on last year, so that didn't happen. Instead, go ahead, make up for that mistake by adding Bolton in 2021. With the 30th overall pick, the Buffalo Bills select defensive end Joseph Ossai. And for the Bills, they're in a great position, like a lot of these other teams picking towards the end of the first round, to just go best player available. Their offense is already stacked. Their defense is pretty strong in the secondary. So here, they're looking at the defensive line, which has a lot of player depth at this point, especially a defensive end. Joseph Ossai happens to be the next best player available in terms of possible defensive end, so he seems like a great fit for the Buffalo Bills. Next at number 31, the Kansas City Chiefs select defensive end Jaylon Phillips. And the Chiefs are in a type of situation where they can usually go best player available. They're likely going to be picking towards the end of the first round most seasons, as long as they have Patrick Mahomes under center, and we know that that will be the case. So here they just go best player available. I know some people might be calling for offensive line help after the showing they had in the Super Bowl, but let's not forget a lot of that was due to just bad timing in terms of injuries. Wide receiver is also a possibility, but again, the value not quite there. So instead, KC goes next best player available, Jaylon Phillips. You can never have enough studs on the defensive line, and Phillips is exactly that. He might be a little bit raw, but at this point in time, he is a good value pick. And finally, with the last pick in the first round, the Tampa Bay Bucks select defensive end Azeez Ojulari. And for Tampa Bay, again, they're in a situation kind of similar to the Kansas City Chiefs. With Tom Brady in town, they can focus on just best player available. Offensively, they're stacked at the wide receiver position. Offensive line, they did a great job of upgrading that position last year. Running back, not all that big of an area of need. They've got 2 potential guys there in Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette. Linebacker, they've got a couple of great pieces there in Levante David and Devin White. The secondary, again, did a very good job of upgrading that position last year. So that kind of just leaves the defensive line. I think Ojulari is that kind of next best player available. You can always use another young stud edge rusher. Jason Pierre-Paul isn't getting any younger, so Ojulari could potentially be that replacement for him once he decides to move on. So with that, we wrap up this NFL Mock Draft version 1.0. And as always, let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree? And what would you like to see your team do in this upcoming NFL draft? In the meantime, if you guys enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. Also, give us a follow on Twitter at AllDayPigskin to continue interacting with us in terms of everything NFL and fantasy football related. We make sure to answer all the questions we get there as well. Also, check us out online at alldaypigskin.com. Sign up for a free newsletter. All the details in the description. But in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.